Everybody wants the moment. Everybody wants the clip, the win, the breakthrough, the clean result, the shot that goes in, the video that blows up, the catch that saves the game, the one play that makes everybody look at you different. But almost nobody wants the part that created it. That's the problem. People say they want greatness, but what they really want is the highlight without the repetition. They want the reward without the routine. They want the visible magic without the invisible work. And that right there is why so many people stay average. Because the part that looks boring is usually the part doing all the heavy lifting. That's something I keep thinking about more and more. The boring part is where it happens. Not the flashy part, not the result, not the applause, not the upload, not the praise, not the highlight. The boring part. And once you really understand that, your whole relationship with progress changes. Because now you stop judging your life only by the exciting moments. You start respecting the process that creates them. Take content creation. Everybody loves the idea of being a creator. Everybody loves the thought of putting their work out there, seeing the comments, seeing the views go up, seeing people connect with something you made. That's the fun part. That's the part people imagine. But editing? Sitting there for hours, cutting things down, tightening the pacing, fixing the audio, listening back, rearranging lines, removing weak parts, trying different versions. It's not the glamorous part. Even if you enjoy it to a degree, let's be honest, after a certain point, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. It can feel slow, repetitive, sometimes annoying, sometimes mentally draining. But that is the part that makes the video what it is. That is the part that turns a decent idea into something sharp. That is the part that makes people actually stay. This is the part that makes the final product feel effortless. And that's how this works in almost every area of life. The thing people clap for is usually built on top of a bunch of moments nobody would clap for. That's why a lot of people quit too early. Not because they're incapable, but because they misread the process. They think, this feels repetitive, this feels slow, this feels boring. Maybe this means I'm on the wrong path. No, a lot of the time, that means you're finally touching the real path. Because real improvement is usually not dramatic while it's happening. It's subtle, it's repetitive, it's quiet. It looks unimpressive from the outside. That's why people disrespect it. They only believe in progress when it looks exciting. But the truth is, some of the most important parts of growth do not look impressive in real time. If you're learning an instrument, the beginning is not sexy. You are failing. Your fingers feel awkward. You don't know where to place things. You sound bad. You stop and restart. You repeat tiny parts over and over and over. Nobody dreams about that part. But that part is where your body starts learning. That part is where your brain starts wiring itself to the skill. That part is where you earn the ability to eventually play something beautiful without thinking so hard. Without that stage, there is no music. And this is why fundamentals matter so much. Look at elite athletes. Stephen Curry is one of the greatest shooters ever. And even he talks about practice in a way that kills this fantasy people have. In his training advice, he emphasizes control over mechanics, starting close to the basket with form shooting, and building disciplined routines instead of just walking into the gym and firing deep threes for fun. Masterclass's summary of his practice approach literally centers on starting close, building to 100 makes, and practicing mechanics daily, while ESPN described an off-season drill that had to be repeated unless he hit at least 80% in under 56 seconds. This is not random. This is structure. That is repetition. That is respect for the boring part. That's the thing. When you see Steph hit a ridiculous step back three or some off-balance shot that looks impossible, what you're seeing is not just talent. You're seeing a mountain of routine that made that shot available. You're seeing someone who kept returning to the base. And most people don't want that answer because it's not exciting enough. They want to believe that magic comes from being special, but a lot of the magic comes from repetition done with attention. That's what deliberate practice research points to. Anders Ericsson described deliberate practice as effortful work aimed at improving performance, not something that is inherently enjoyable. And the APA similarly explains that deliberate practice involves attention, rehearsal, and repetition. That later becomes more complex skills. In other words, the boring part is not a side quest. It is the construction site. And you can see the same thing in football. Think about a wide receiver. People lose their minds over the craziest catch, the contested catch, the sideline catch, the one-handed catch, the deep ball over the top. But why do receivers spend so much time on routine catching drills? Why do they sit there catching ball after ball after ball? Because they understand something most regular people don't. They understand that when the big moment comes, your body does not rise to the level of your hype. It falls back on what you've trained. And that's why Detroit Amon-Ra St. Brown talked about catching 202 balls off the jugs machine after practice. That number sounds obsessive to normal people. To elite performers, it sounds like maintenance. It sounds like respect for the craft. Same thing with quarterbacks. When you watch a quarterback warming up, a lot of what you see is not some dramatic bomb down the field every 5 seconds. Warm-up progressions commonly begin with lighter throws and a focus on sound mechanics before building up, because the point is not to show off. The point is to lock in the base, the foundation, the small movements that everything else sits on top of. And that's the part regular people get bored of, because it looks too simple, too ordinary, too repetitive. But that is exactly why it matters. The boring part is where consistency is built. The boring part is where your body learns. The boring part is where sloppiness gets corrected. The boring part is where your standards get formed. The boring part is where reliability comes from. And reliability is what makes greatness possible. Because when the moment gets chaotic, you do not want to rely on inspiration. You want to rely on something deeper than mood. You want to rely on what has been practiced so many times that your mind and body trust it. That applies to sports, it applies to music, it applies to content, it applies to social skills, it applies to confidence, it applies to almost everything. Even conversation, even being able to speak clearly, even being able to hold yourself in a room. A lot of people want the polished version of themselves without going through the repetitive, awkward, sometimes embarrassing reps of becoming that person. They want to be confident without repeatedly entering uncomfortable situations. They want to speak well without repeatedly thinking, writing, reading, and expressing themselves. They want discipline without repeatedly doing things they are not in the mood to do. But that's not how this works. You become polished through repetition. You become sharp through repetition. You become calm through repetition. You become dangerous through repetition. And this is also why boredom is such a serious test. Because boredom exposes whether you actually care. Anybody can show up when something is exciting. Anybody can be motivated when the idea is fresh. Anybody can feel locked in when the result is close. But what about when it's quiet? What about when nobody sees it? What about when it feels repetitive? What about when it feels like the rep you are doing right now is not changing your life? Can you still respect it? Can you still bring attention to it? Can you still do it clean? Because that's where people separate. Not in the highlight, in the maintenance, in the ordinary rep, in the quote-unquote easy thing done seriously. That's the part people underrate. They think the boring part is just something you have to survive so you can get to the real thing. No, the boring part is the real thing. That's what I need people to understand. The warm-up is the real thing. The editing is the real thing. The missed notes are the real thing. The rough draft is the real thing. The practice throw is the real thing. The basic catching drill is the real thing. The form shooting is the real thing. The highlight is just the receipt. And once that clicks in your mind, you stop having this childish relationship with progress when you only value what looks impressive. You start valuing the hidden architecture. You start realizing that excellence is usually just fundamentals done long enough, seriously enough, and clean enough that eventually they become invisible. And that is where the magic comes from. Not because the boring part looks magical, but because it creates things that look magical later. That crazy shot? Built on repetition. That huge performance? Built on repetition. That clean video? Built on repetition. That calm confidence? Built on repetition. That version of you that seems effortless one day? Built on 1,000 moments that look boring while they were happening. So the next time you feel yourself getting impatient with the slow part, or disrespecting the routine part, or feeling like you're above the fundamentals, remember this. The part of the process that feels the least glamorous is often the part carrying the most weight. Do not rush past it, do not disrespect it, do not treat it like it's beneath you. The boring part is not what delays the magic. The boring part is what creates it. And if you can learn to love that part, or at the very least respect it, you will put yourself ahead of a lot of people who are still chasing outcomes without ever building the structure that can hold them. That's what the best do. They don't just show up for the moment. They show up for the repetition that makes the moment possible. So if you're in a season right now where your life feels repetitive, where the work feels basic, where the rep feels small, where the process feels less exciting than the picture in your head, good. That might mean you're finally in the place where something real is being built. Because the boring part, that's where the magic is.